guys? Hey, it's Aaron here with the Duke. Hey, today we're going to be running through our fantasy football draft strategies, alright? So we're going to split this up into a 3-segment video for you. And we're going to be using our Fantasy Pros draft board and our simulator so that you have a visual of what you're seeing other than just my face talking throughout this process, okay? But like I said, we're going to have a 3-part series. This first series in today's episode is going to be rounds 1 through 3, okay? And that's all we're focused on today. We'll put out another video with the 4 through 7, and then we'll have 7 through 10 for the remaining, for those mid rounds and then the late round picks. But today we're going to run through this. We're using Fantasy Pros, half PPR again, snake draft, 12-team league, and we're going to go out of the 9th round, or the 9th position this time, all right? So bear with us, but we're going to be discussing this, and we're going to be using our draft strategy going into the 2020 fantasy football season. But hey, while we're waiting for this to load, let's hit that like, hit that subscribe, and let's get started here, all right? So obviously the first thing we want to look at anytime in fantasy football, it doesn't matter if you're in standard league, half PPR, PPR, running backs are the best value and the number 1 position that we're after. So we're always going to check at the running back position before we draft anything else. But we don't want to draft out of our position on those running backs. So this is our scenario now. We're going to hide the drafted players here. We got Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Zeke, Thomas, Cook, Henry, Adams, and then Kamara. Now this is a strategy here that I'm using specifically if you want to follow with us. I don't see taking Joe Mixon or Josh Jacobs. I see Josh Jacobs going quite a bit in the first round as well. We don't personally see either of those two actually being worthy of first round picks. Now I think the reason why they're going that early is because people get nervous and worried and they want to make sure they're getting a running back, and so they're drafting them out of place. But really, if you look at their stat lines and teams are on and their reception attempts and what those offenses are able to do, these guys are RB3s. They should be possibly your RB2 in your team. And they actually are putting up the same stat lines as the David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, and your Leonard Fournette. And there's no reason for these guys to be getting drafted this early. So we're avoiding them. If you think otherwise, I guess you can go for that. But I actually see a Nick Chubb or possibly a receiver being a better value than those running backs. Now see, out of this position, the one thing you want to make sure of in the snake is we always want to try and project what's going to be taken before our next spot, all right? So I know that this is going to be a running back heavy league, and there's a couple wide receivers left. Now, is there any wide receiver that I specifically want? I don't really see any of these running backs being so much good that I need to jump on them at this 9th spot. I would rather almost take one of their top receivers because I know that one of the running backs are still going to be here in the 2nd round. And that's kind of just, we're guessing that Julio, Tyreek, or DeAndre Hopkins. I would much rather grab one of them and then pick from this whole list all the way down to Aaron Jones, Miles Sanders, or Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and have both those guys, then take a jab at Joe Mixon first. The receivers go off the board, and then I'm taking in Aaron Jones. That doesn't make sense in drafting. We want to take the best value. Now, if you watch any of our videos, we talk about boom and safe players. The biggest thing we want to look for, we need boom players on our team. We need players who can put up 30-point games every once in a while to help us get over that hump and win a couple more games. So if we build our entire team just off of safety, we can make it to the playoffs. We can get to the playoffs, and that's fine. But it is hard to win your championship without having those big boom players that can put up those 30-point games. Now, when I look over here, I like Julio and I like Tyreek Hill. Now, it might be quite a bit of a reach for Tyreek Hill, but I know that he's probably the biggest boom player in all of fantasy football. I mean, there's nobody else really other than possibly Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, which are quarterbacks, and we're not talking about that. There's no other running back or wide receivers that can put up as big a numbers on a weekly basis as Tyreek Hill has the potential to do. And so I almost want to take Tyreek Hill here because I know he'll probably leave, and then I can still pick up one of those other running backs. Nick Chubb will go. We can go the safer route with the running back and then pick up one of these wide receivers. Let's take Tyreek Hill in the first, and let's get that boom player that we were looking for. All right, so just like I was saying earlier, we knew those wide receivers were going to go, and we wanted to get one. I don't mind taking Julio Jones in that situation. I don't know the situation with DeAndre Hopkins in Arizona. Now, we know that DeAndre Hopkins is probably the #1 most athletic wide receiver in the NFL, but we don't know what that's going to look like for the Arizona Cardinals yet. I'm not a fan of taking the Chris Godwin or the Mike Evans. I believe there's possibly room for one of them to finish as a top 10 wide receiver in that offense, because we've seen Edelman do that in a half PPR league. I don't think there's enough room for two of them. And I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if Chris Godwin gets most of the receptions in that Edelman-type role, but Mike Evans ends up being the touchdown leading receiver on that team. And here's the reasons why. Tom Brady has not had a wide receiver of that big of target and body size and athleticism like Mike Evans since Randy Moss. I mean, that's really the only receiver he's had that's been that kind of body build. And I'm not saying that Mike Evans is Randy Moss, because Randy Moss is obviously much better and much faster. But he hasn't had anybody of that prototype and body size to throw the ball to. So I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Evans becomes his favorite target when it comes to the red zone, the end zone. Chris Godwin is probably going to get a lot of those dump and underpasses like we saw at Edelman, but we definitely see touchdowns going to Mike Evans. And to be honest, both those receivers are just being taken way too high for us to know what that situation is going to look like. And like I said earlier, we want these first rounds to be safe players with high ceiling, all right? And I don't know what Chris Godwin and Mike Evans look like. So their floors are not safe to me. It's a gamble. So anyways, now that we got back to it, we know that Nick Chubb went. Let's look at these running backs. Now, if you watch our video, I'm not as high on Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a lot of people are going to be. I think he's going to be drafted way too high compared to where he was going before. We personally saw him as a third-round draft person to go after in the draft, and now he's just going to go way off the boards. And I just don't see that panning out. And the reason is that that's a high prolific offense, but with Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, and then Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I don't feel like there's enough room for 3 stars in that offense with Patrick Mahomes. Now, there could be a secondary where he's an RB2, but in order for him to finish a top 10 or a top 5 running back, in which he's going to end up being drafted at now, you're telling me that 1, Travis Kelce's going to fall off, or 2, Tyreek Hill's going to fall off this year. There's just not enough there for all 3 of those guys to finish in the top 5 in all their positions, unless Patrick Mahomes comes out and has another 55 touchdown season. So we're going to avoid Clyde Edwards-Helaire and let somebody else take him. I'm actually higher on Miles Sanders than I am Kenyon Drake. So far, we haven't seen any reasons. The amount of touches in that offense are going to be much higher. The only thing that Miles Sanders kind of has regressed from Kenyon Drake is that Arizona scores touchdown with their running backs more often than Philadelphia has in the past. But the touches, the chances, the receptions are all going to be higher for Miles Sanders, and there's nobody even giving him a chance against that for his ball, where we have to worry about possibly a Chase Edmonds situation with Kenyon Drake. So at this position, I'm going to take Miles Sanders as my running back 1 in this draft. Now, when it comes to the quarterbacks and drafting these first 3 rounds, the only 2 quarterbacks that you should be looking at in these first 3 to 4 rounds is obviously Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. And to be honest, I think the only quarterback worth drafting out of those 2 is Lamar Jackson in the early rounds. And here's the reason being. Lamar Jackson gets all of his points mostly from rushing the ball. He had over 1,000 yards last year, and it's almost like having an RB2 added to your quarterback position. Patrick Mahomes, on the other hand, is not going to do that. The only way Patrick Mahomes comes out and has a season like he did 2 years ago or like Lamar Jackson is if he throws 50 touchdowns. So you're telling me that Lamar Jackson can come out and he can have the same season as last year rushing the ball, and even if he has 10 less touchdowns than last year, he can still finish RB1, but Patrick Mahomes has to throw 50 touchdown passes? I mean, The best case scenario for that, or the safest pick, is taking the rushing grounds or the rushing yards on the ground from Lamar Jackson compared to Patrick Mahomes having to throw 50 touchdowns. So we only see Lamar Jackson being the one worthy of that. Same as the tight ends. If you're going after a tight end early, George Kittle and Travis Kelce are the only two tight ends that are worth drafting early in the rounds. We do not recommend going after an Ertz, Matthews, or a Waller. There's just too much potential that you could have here in the 4th, 5th, and 6th round that you're going to lose taking one of those tight ends. And by the end of the draft, one of those guys, they're not even going to score much more points than if you would pick up like that 7th or 8th number tight end in the draft. So we're definitely going late this year on tight end. Let's look at our draft picks here. We have Josh Jacobs, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Lamar Jackson going in the 3-1 spot. And then we see this big run on wide receiver. So let's go back up and let's look at possible running backs available. Now I know that out of these receivers, personally at this round in the 3rd, I only feel comfortable taking Amari Cooper. But with the Tyreek Hill already, we have that boom player. And Amari Cooper's another boom player. He's probably the next boom player behind Tyreek Hill as far as wide receiver goes. He reminds me a lot of when you used to play A.J. Green in fantasy football. A.J. Green would come out and he'd put up 30-point games, but then the next week he'd only put up 2 points. And that's kind of what Amari Cooper does. So when you build your team up, you need to be able to deflect that and what that's going to happen to your roster. So if you have boom players, you need to also have safe players, all right? They're going to even that out, because otherwise you're going to find yourself on certain weeks only scoring 50 points because all these boom players didn't do anything. So out of this situation, we always want to go running back first. I feel like Todd Gurley is probably the best choice. I don't mind taking James Conner. I know that the only reason why anybody's avoiding him is because of injury. Otherwise, he should be going in the 2nd round this year with the rest of those running backs. He would definitely finish in the top 10 of running backs as long as he stays healthy all season. So it's almost a value pick with James Conner right now if you're able to get him. But at this point in the draft, I'm kind of hoping that maybe in that 4th position, we could get another James Conner. He'll probably end up going, but we don't want to stack Amari Cooper with Tyreek Hill. And I don't see any of these receivers being too much. I think in that 2nd round, I could probably still get a Robert Woods or a Tyler Lockett, and that's my safe wide receiver to go along with Tyreek Hill's boom. And now that I have Miles Sanders, who's a boom running back, I don't mind taking a safe running back here because I know that Miles Sanders is going to be able to break some receptions and stuff out this year. And he's probably going to put up some 20-point games. So I would almost best bet to go with the safest running back at this time. I like Mark Ingram, and I also kind of like Melvin Gordon here. But Todd Gurley is definitely the best choice of what we can take. And in that offense, he's definitely going to put up the same numbers that Devontae Freeman was putting up, and he's just a safe pick bearing any injury. Now, I know injuries worry people, but in the last 4 seasons, Todd Gurley has only missed 4 games. 4 games in 4 seasons, but yet we act like he's been missing entire seasons. I think Chris Carson's missed more time than him, and Chris Carson's going in some leagues before Todd Gurley. And that makes no sense because we know that Todd Gurley, when healthy, is a top 3 running back in the NFL. So like I said, you know, we were just going strictly off the first 3 rounds. Now in our strategy this time that you saw, we decided to skip the Joe Mixon and the Josh Jacobs run that most people have because I would much rather have Tyreek Hill on my team and then pick up a Miles Sanders than I would to have a Joe Mixon. I feel like Tyreek Hill at his position is such a bigger boom and value on my team that's going to set me off compared to the rest of these teams than having a Joe Mixon. Because at the end of the year, if Todd Gurley stays healthy, Todd Gurley's going to have more points and be a better fantasy running back than Joe Mixon. And we got that in the 3rd round. And that's exactly what I was talking about earlier with Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs. There's no reason to be drafting them that early because you can get the same value at running back in a Leonard Fournette, Todd Gurley, and a Chris Carson. As long as they all stay healthy, none of them are going to be off of each other much at the end of the season other than maybe like a 10-point difference after it's all said and done. So don't waste your first pick on these 2 running backs. Aaron Jones is another one that we are not as high on, but I see him actually dropping. So I actually don't mind taking him here at the end of the second or the beginning of the third if he drops in your league. He's definitely not worth that first round pick or even the beginning of the second. There's just too many scenarios in that offense. There's definitely going to be a regression from his touchdowns last season. And now with A.J. Dillon and Matt LaFleur as the head coach, we know that Matt LaFleur likes a timeshare in that backfield. And I feel like everything just went right for Aaron Jones last year. And there's no way that's going to happen again this season. So the tight ends, like I said, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. So this is a pretty good scenario here because I don't see any other tight ends or quarterbacks that should be going into the third round. So we definitely got what we saw here. This is the best case scenario. And like I said, we're going to come out with that next video here later on the week. And we're going to finish this draft, and we're going to go into the 4th, 5th, and 6th round. And we're going to do our mid-round picks in that strategy. So make sure you stay tuned, hit the like, hit the subscribe, and we'll see you guys later.